Okay, good morning. It is Thursday, July 30th, and welcome to the Sociality Squared Director's Cut, our weekly Director's Cut, where I do commentary on what we produce here at Sociality Squared and just cover other tech and social media marketing news. And yesterday was a big day in the tech world. Today, our main theme is going to be the power of friendship. This comes from our monthly newsletter that just came out yesterday. So I will put the link to that so you can read all of that. And then, yeah, hopefully today I won't get trolled. Last week, mid broadcast, someone reported the video as violating music copyrights, which, if you all have been joining for a long time or new, I have never played music once. So, yeah, that was a little bit of a hiccup. I ended up having to, yeah, re-download and or re-upload the video last week. So anyway, if you missed last week's video on the psychology of sharing, it is now on the Facebook page. I'll put it up on YouTube later, or someone will put it up on YouTube. But I appreciate you being here today and sharing some of your time with me today. And then also on a very somber note, it was reported that yesterday we've surpassed 150,000 deaths here in the United States due to the coronavirus. It is just absolutely heartbreaking and devastating. In a lot of ways, it's just hard to wrap our minds around what's happening and the mass loss and the mass grieving. And just, I always do reminders to myself and then also on my personal, feeds that we can't normalize this, and we can't become numb to the news. We can't ignore the news. And we always have to remember that each of these stats represents a person. So my heart is with your heart. I know it's a tough time and we're not out of this yet. And my heart is also especially with the Black community right now. And as I've said before here at Sociality Squared, we don't want to return business back to normal. We want to create a better standard, one rooted in anti-racism and radical inclusion and equality. So if you're new, I'm Helen Todd. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sociality Squared. We're a full-service social media agency that understands the magic of people coming together around what they value and love. And clients partner with us to grow their businesses and know that trust us to know that behind every screen is a person. So today, I'll be sharing some S2 news in addition to the topic, some social media news and some inspiration. So the S2 news, as I mentioned just a second ago, July's newsletter came out yesterday. I'll put the full link in the description after this video, the live broadcast is completed. And if you haven't signed up for our monthly newsletter, I highly encourage you to. We only hit your inbox once a month, usually the last week. And we put a lot of time into it. It has a lot of good information packed into it, and we get a lot of good feedback from it. So I do encourage you to read it and sign up for it. One big thing, next Wednesday on August 5th at noon, I'll be on a panel discussing social impact for all businesses. I'm going to be joined with 3 other great panelists. One that I just want to highlight today, who I've been on a panel at South by Southwest before, is Nasser Job. He's just as amazing work and very practitioner in terms of baking social good into his company, which is very new, the Migrant Kitchen here in New York City. And he actually just was on the NASDAQ here in Times Square. So he's so inspirational. He's a Palestinian refugee turned NYC food entrepreneur. And the Migrant Kitchen has been feeding the food insecure. They've been feeding throughout the pandemic doctors and frontline essential workers. So he's just really amazing. And we'll also have Alex Cohen and Anne I can never pronounce her last name, who also are very much in the space. And we're going to be talking about how all businesses can really bake in social impact or doing social good into their core business practices. And it's not really just for the Ben and Jerry's or Tom Shoes of the world. One of the important questions we're going to ask is, how do we bridge the gap between good intentions and strategy execution to ensure that businesses actually make a positive impact and line our values with our core business practices? So I'll put the link in there into the description, but again, that's next Wednesday, August 5th, between noon and 1 p.m. And then other news, this will be the last Facebook Live for the summer. I'm taking August off. As much as we are a plugged in company and social media, I'm also a very big believer in the need to unplug. And so I'm taking August off from the broadcast, and we'll be back in September. And if there's any specific topics you would love for me to speak to, anything related to sociality and social media marketing, do let me know. And then, of course, if you haven't liked this page, please do. You'll definitely get a notification from Facebook when I come. When I come back live in September. Okay, so for today's theme, I'm going to talk about the power of friendship. How are we on time? I always go over on these broadcasts. I try to keep them to 30 minutes. And this is each monthly newsletter we do a theme. And the main, inspiration for this is Daryl Davis, who I mentioned on July 16th's broadcast. And I'll talk, when you talk about friendship, there's so many different ways that you can dissect it, especially through the lens of social media marketing. There's a great book called Grouped. It's kind of like this thin little book from Paul Adams that he wrote. And if you're not familiar with that name, which you probably aren't, he is the guy who did a presentation on Google or on like how real life networks work. That Google Plus actually, or Google hired him for Google Plus to work on their product, and then Facebook eventually hired him. And I'm not sure what he's up to now, but he's a really smart guy and has written a lot of really interesting things on, you have your close networks or your close ties and going out the circle. I don't want to focus on that today. I will focus on networks and on a future broadcast. Today, I just want to talk about, we're in the middle of a pandemic, a civil rights unrest, and here in the US, it's an election year. We're 96 days away from the 2020 election. And it can seem really overwhelming, and especially on an individual basis, like what can we do to actually affect change in this? It can be very overwhelming. And I think I mentioned this on last week's broadcast. I've been on a Wachowski sisters binge and really recommend all of their work. And as part of kind of going through all of the work that they've done, I watched Cloud Atlas, and the book with the same name, David Mitchell wrote this quote. And I think this is just a really relevant quote, at least it resonated with me, that I wanted to share with you today. It says, "My life amounts to no more than one drop in a limitless ocean, yet what is any ocean but a multitude of drops?" So right now, everything that we do might feel, like a drop in the bucket, or just doesn't have any impact. And there are enormous issues to address, like stopping the spread of a pandemic, ending systematic racism, upholding our democracy, and reversing climate change. These are all huge, massive issues. But the quote and the movie and the book kind of begs the question, and yet, what is an ocean made of? So all of our actions matter, no matter in what capacity. And one thing that I mentioned in the newsletter is like all of the words that we speak have energy attached to them. Everything that we type has energy attached to it. Even if it's something as silly as sending a meme to help brighten someone's day, that affects change in a positive way, or at least putting positive energy out there. Wearing your masks, being kind to others, and being kind to yourself. And one of the things with friendship that's so important is actually befriending people who think differently than you, and showing kindness to people and showing kindness to yourself. And Daryl Davis's story just exemplifies this so much. And I know I've mentioned him before, but he's in the newsletter and he's in our inspiration section. But his story is that he is a Black musician, and he had, and there's a great video that's just 9 minutes that I highly recommend. And then there's 2 longer interviews with him on the Love and Radio podcast, which are really great. But he just didn't understand how people could hate him who didn't know him. So his approach to kind of understanding how racism works was to go directly to the Ku Klux Klan and ask them. And he, over time, friended Klan leaders. I don't know all the names, like the Grand Wizards and whatnot. And through friendship, these people changed their beliefs were challenged, and over time they changed their minds. And over the course of, since he started this, I think over 200 different people in the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacy groups have given up their robes and left these groups, which is just absolutely amazing. And one of the core things that his story shares is it's sitting across the table from someone and showing them respect and dignity, even if they disagree with you, and being like brave enough to do that. It's so like, it can be hard because we come with our own defenses, our own ego. We want to be right, especially in this heated geopolitical climate. It's like it can so easily escalate to getting your point across or whatever. And this approach is very different, of just showing the other person dignity and respect and listening, and then also coming and just sharing your perspective and your story. And AOC said this, I think, what was it, last year at South by Southwest, like, you're never going to aha someone, in a conversation. But if you listen to them and show them respect and have them feel heard, that opens, that person will be more open to hear what you have to say, and maybe a seed is planted. And then over time, through friendship and getting to know one another, if it's a new person, change can happen. Like in the case of Daryl Davis, Ku Klux Klan leaders leaving the Klan. And it's also really important. I've mentioned this to a few friends this week. One of the hot topics right now is diversity and inclusion, which is so needed and overdue. And I'm so glad there's so many efforts on this. I'm in a subcommittee for one of my networking groups to get the organization more diverse. But one thing, it's often very much, as soon as you start thinking about that, you think about maybe gender diversity or color of our skin diversity. But one thing, often you don't think about the diversity of thought and having, people on the, I don't know, I say this lovingly, like your right-wing rednecks who don't see it the same way. Like, we need to involve conversation, and I have relatives and loved ones that fall under that bucket, and if you're watching it, I say I love you. That they have to be included in the conversation too, and can't just be sidelined. And actually, if you look at like ISIS recruitment and far right hate group recruitments, often it's people who feel like they don't have friends, don't have a sense of belonging, don't have a sense of community, that are the easiest and most vulnerable to be recruited into these hate groups. And I think this is maybe Dana Boyd said this, but don't quote me, who does a lot of media misinformation and manipulation work with Data and Society. I'm pretty sure it was her that said it, but if you're a white male, don't belong to community, it's not a far reach to then become a white nationalist and kind of go down that rabbit hole. And of course, the algorithms don't help in these recruitments. But so one drop in the bucket is when we're thinking about inclusion, we have to think beyond like friendship, show ourselves kindness and dignity, and however we need to show up, show our close friends and family that, but also extend that kindness to our loose ties and to people that might not be as blessed with the same friend groups and networks that we have. And even if it's just one person, that makes a difference, or showing up and offering kindness. So if you only one drop you get from today, I put this in the newsletter to embrace dignity and friendship hand in hand. So that was the main thing I wanted to share today. I really recommend Daryl Davis, and as there's so much uncertainty in the world, just rooting ourselves in friendship can make such a big difference. And there was actually a quote, I'm not so religious these days, but I was raised in the church, and across the entranceway to the main area where Mass was held, there was a sign, "There are no strangers, only friends we haven't met yet." So I really think that that's beautiful, and especially with the Sociality Squared, principle, remind behind every screen that there's a person. And it maybe just even extend that behind every screen is a friend that you may not have met yet. And keeping that in mind, maybe the internet would be a little bit less of a cesspool, and even how we engage with people who disagree with us might be a little bit softer. And we should engage with people who think differently than us. So anyway, okay, that is what I wanted to say. For the news, yesterday, it was a really big day. Casey Newton called it the social networking event of the summer. You had a long-awaited antitrust hearing where you had Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Google's Sundar Pichai, and Apple's Tim Cook, all WebEx, they used WebEx for this, to the, the antitrust subcommittee, or whatever their title is. It was really long. I tried to watch, I watched most of it, but I had to get some actual work done yesterday too. Casey Newton's newsletter that he did last night on the interface sums it up really nicely. Yeah, I agree with everything that he said in terms of it was kind of a little all over the place, in all of these different representatives, asking for different people, jumping around on different topics and different questions. But it's a good first step, and it's kind of a hint at the regulation that will come, and I agree that it is very needed. And some what he pointed out is finally it's the House Judiciary Committee is doing their work that's needed. What was it, a few years ago when they grilled Zuckerberg, and I forget, maybe that was around the Cambridge Analytica, I forget, but they were asking questions that some of the representatives just didn't know basic things, how things worked. So for the most part, everyone showed up, with a lot of research. They've interviewed a lot of different witnesses leading up to this trial, or to this hearing. And there were a few, some lame questions, like one representative saying like, why is my father not seeing my campaign emails? You know, why is it going to spam? But overall, it was a good first step, and hopefully regulation will come. There is still a possibility that some of them might need to be spun off. Just a few key points. Amazon focused on the company's use of third-party seller data, and I uh, um, and there was a really powerful moment. I forget the person who showed this, but they actually brought in the voice of a woman who was selling textbooks and played the audio of how her business was crushed. It was really powerful in that moment. So that was one of the key things. And then also how Amazon like schemed to undermine parent company diapers, and just how they absorbed so many financial loss to undercut the market and then acquire them for a loss. Apple definitely got off the easiest, although they have I think not the smallest case, but the main thing that was honed in on for them was just the App Store and the relationship between Apple not having any fees for their apps and yet charge all app developers 30%. So that was just and just their market power. And then Facebook, there wasn't really anything new with Facebook. In my opinion, a lot of it was like looking back on the acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram, and digging into that even more. Google, probably took the hardest questions, although deservedly so, on just I think one of the best examples. I'm forgetting the representative's name right this second. Like equated Google's ad platform to the stock market, and brokers and insider sharing, and to the ad platform of, if you own all pieces and can leverage the data for your own benefit, that's like insider trading, and not sharing, insider trading. But the stock market has regulation and Google doesn't. So I thought that was a really good point that was brought up. So Casey Newton does a really good job kind of summarizing all of these, and I'm sure there's like recap videos, and the news has covered it extensively. But in short, a lot of topics were covered. It was kind of like all over the place. And how Casey Newton in his newsletter, in the end, I'm left with the words of Representative David Cicilline as he ended the hearing. The companies as they exist today have monopoly power. Some need to be broken up and some need to be regulated. It is not nearly enough, but it was true, and it was a beginning. So it will be really interesting to see. I think the Judiciary Committee is going to be producing a report in 3-6 months, whenever, with recommendations of what they're going to do. So that will be really interesting. And today, I don't know what time, Facebook is also releasing their earnings report, and I think all of them will be soon. So it'll be really interesting to see what is said and shared related to that, and how this impacts that. So more stuff to pay attention to. Let's see. Oh, something else. I really do recommend Casey Newton's newsletter. He, in a previous newsletter, which I'll include the link below, kind of discussed a lot of viewpoints that he expected leading up to yesterday's hearing, and also mentioned the possible emergence of the splinter net, which I think is something to also kind of keep our eyes on. And what he means by the splinter net is kind of how China has its own internet, depending on how the regulation is, and how platforms might become more country, not specific, but almost blocked. Like India has blocked TikTok, which is a huge move. that the internet as we know it, as globally accessible for the most part, will have many walls around them, like the Great China Internet Wall or whatever it's called. So that's kind of interesting. Oh, and then a few other quick notes. So Michael Bloomberg created an entire agency that was like digitally smart for his presidential run. And they were doing some really smart digital savvy campaigns. Didn't really help with his run, but that collective of content creators is back with a new campaign against Trump's reelection, doing a lot of memes and focus on vote by mail registration. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. It's just interesting in general to see any election year. I mean, regular elections from a marketing standpoint is, it's fascinating. Like the war rooms, and even with direct mail, how specific the messaging gets to zip code, and digital just amplifies how targeted you can be in both a good and bad way in a lot of instances. But the creativity and muscle from a digital standpoint that's exercise, I'm often very impressed with what campaigns do, or fascinated might be a better way to say that. So this will be good to pay attention to, just also from a marketing standpoint. What can we learn from it? Let's see. Kevin Roose, who writes for the New York Times, covers tech. He's a great writer, along with Taylor Lorenz, who she wrote the article on Michael Bloomberg's presidential run. Also, I think I forgot her name in a previous broadcast, but she's great. So Kevin Roose in the New York Times argues, don't ban TikTok, make an example of it. And this kind of goes to the splinternet point too, that we can't just block every company, Chinese company in the US, because more or less we'd have to create our own version of China's Great Firewall. So he kind of argues that Chinese apps and American democracy need to find a way to coexist. So some interesting food for thought. And then another woman who was an ex-CIA, or is an ex-CIA officer, and worked for Facebook for only 6 months on elections integrity, wrote an article, or was interviewed for The Guardian, just saying that Facebook is ripe for manipulation and ripe for viral misinformation. And it is not a very uplifting article, in the sense that she states Facebook is never going to make fundamental changes that address the key systematic issues that make it ripe for manipulation and viral misinformation. And one thing that was kind of interesting, yesterday's hearing, someone asked about the ad boycott that 1,100 different brands have, joined against Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg's response was, we're not going to change our content policy due to advertisers. That they already set this like high bar and standard. So he has agreed to doing an outside audit, that they're internally, they took an internal initiative for, an ethics standpoint around all of this. It'll be really interesting to see what they actually do. And it's such a, precarious time being so close to the election. And all of the Republicans yesterday were, very concerned about, silencing the right's voice, which is not the case. This bias does not exist. The top links, I think the top 10 links all shared from Facebook, or traffic from Facebook, are all from the right now. So that bias just isn't true, even though that they claim it all the time. But that said, Facebook still has to has a lot to do, and we'll see what actually gets done between now and the election. Um, and so I'll put the links for these. Some of these came from the monthly newsletter, so I'll include that link. So if you don't see the link to these articles, click over to the newsletter, and the full month roundup is there. And then to end, we always like to end on a good note with some inspiration. Our inspiration actually comes as a client spotlight from our newsletter, and I just wanted to highlight CUMAC. They're a nonprofit based in northern New Jersey, and they're just great. I'm a big fan of what they do. For us to even work with them, and this was pre-pandemic last year, they only want to work with partners who actually see their facility and fully understand what they do, and I just have so much respect even just for that approach. And they're a food pantry, but there's so much more. They're really reimagining what that is. Not only from, they have this choice marketplace in regular times where it feels more like shopping, and that people have choice within the food that they choose, to making sure that they don't look at just like feeding people as solving hunger, but as the whole social support services around that person and treating that person with dignity. That's a huge thing for them, to raise the whole person up to stop hunger and give them, family and work and other support services. So it's one of their lines is, excuse me, empowering citizens to realize their full potential, helping families to permanently liberate themselves from hunger and poverty, and enabling them to thrive. And with the pandemic, and as many people who have lost jobs, they really saw an increase in people needing their services, and they had to cut staff, but still they didn't cut staff, sorry. They're very volunteer based, and they lost a lot of volunteers, overnight due to the pandemic and the lockdown, but they still remained operational. And another big concern is that people couldn't come to CUMAC to get food, so they formed a coalition with I think 4 other nonprofits to be able to drive and deliver food to people who couldn't pick it up in person. So they're amazing, the work that they do, their approach, and showing dignity and treating the whole person, to help not only feed them but liberate them from poverty and being food insecure. So they're amazing. I encourage you to follow them on Instagram and Facebook. It's a very light way to show support to a great organization. And if you feel so, they do take donations. And they actually prefer donations so that they can buy healthy food at a lower cost, money donations. They prefer to take that so that they can buy food at lower cost and healthy food versus taking food donations. So they're great. They inspire me. So I hope that they inspire you a little bit too. So that wraps up today's broadcast. Thank you for joining. Again, like this page, and when I come back in September, you'll get a notification, but it will probably be the same schedule as Thursday mornings. And do sign up for the panel I'm on next week, which will be Wednesday, August 5th, and I'll leave that link in just a few minutes into the broadcast. So thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of your summer, and just stay safe, stay vigilant, and think of people behind the screen on the other side as friends. Okay, thanks. Bye.